The crystal towers of the royal palace reached high into the purple sky of Novaterra. Inside the grand training hall, King Du-jin watched his daughter with a deep frown on his face. Princess Jai-yun was trying her best to lift the training sword, but her arms shook with the effort. The weapon fell to the ground with a loud clang. Again, King Du-jin ordered, his voice stern. He stood tall, his silver skin reflecting the light from the 3 moons that shone through the large windows. A princess of Novaterra must be strong. Jai-yun picked up the sword once more. Sweat ran down her face as she struggled to hold it properly. Unlike other Novaterrans who were naturally strong, Jai-yun had been born different. Her silver skin was paler, and her body was smaller than others her age. "I can't, father," she said softly, letting the sword drop again. "Maybe I could try something else. I've been reading about diplomatic." "No." King Du-jin's voice echoed through the hall. "We are warriors. For 10,000 years, the royal family has led our people in battle. How can you lead if you cannot even lift a sword?" Jai-yun looked down at her feet. She wanted to make her father proud, but her body simply wouldn't cooperate. While other young Novaterrans could lift heavy weights and fight with ease, she preferred spending time in the library, learning about other worlds and different ways of solving problems. The king walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He watched the 3 moons of Novaterra moving slowly across the sky. His people were known throughout the galaxy as great warriors. Their natural strength and fighting skills had kept them safe from enemies for generations. But his only child, his daughter, was different. "Your mother was one of our greatest warriors," Du-jin said quietly. "Before she died defending our borders, she could defeat 10 enemies at once. Our people need a leader like that." Jai-yun felt tears forming in her eyes, but she held them back. Crying was not the Novaterran way. "I'm sorry, father. I try to be stronger, but trying is not enough." Du-jin turned suddenly, his royal robes swirling around him. "The other noble families whisper behind our backs. They say you are too weak to lead. Some even suggest I should choose another heir." The princess's heart sank. She knew the nobles talked about her, but hearing her father say it made it worse. She walked to one of the weapon racks and ran her finger along a spear. What if there were other ways to be strong? Du-jin was about to answer when a guard rushed into the training hall. "Your Majesty, important news from the Earth sector." The king raised his hand, allowing the guard to speak. The guard held up a data crystal, and a hologram appeared in the air. It showed images of human warriors in battle. They were smaller than Novaterrans, with different colored skin, but they fought with incredible skill. As Du-jin watched the footage, his expression changed. The humans were defeating much larger aliens using something they called martial arts. They weren't relying on natural strength alone, but on technique and strategy. The king looked at his daughter, who was watching the hologram with fascination. For the first time in years, he saw hope. Perhaps there was a solution, one that no Novaterran king had ever tried before. "Leave us," he commanded the guard. After they were alone, he turned to Jai-yun. "Daughter, I have made a decision. If you cannot be strong in the Novaterran way, perhaps it is time to try something new. I will send for a human warrior to train you." Jai-yun's eyes widened with surprise. Having a human in the royal palace was unheard of. Some would call it an insult to their traditions. But as she looked at her father's face, she saw that he was serious. "Thank you, father," she said quietly, hope rising in her chest. Maybe this was her chance to show everyone that there were different kinds of strength. Du-jin nodded firmly. "But remember, Jai-yun, this is your last chance. If this fails, I must think about the future of our people first." He walked out of the training hall, leaving his daughter alone with her thoughts and the weight of his words. Han Sol stepped out of the space transport and looked up at the crystal towers of the Novaterran palace. The 3 moons in the purple sky cast strange shadows across his face. After 15 years of fighting across the galaxy, he thought he had seen everything. But this assignment was different. Two royal guards approached him. They were tall, with silver skin that sparkled in the moonlight. Han Solo noticed how they moved. Powerful and proud, like all Novaterans, they looked down at him, probably wondering why a small human was here. "Follow us," one guard said. "King Du-Jin is waiting." Han Solo picked up his small bag and walked behind them. His footsteps were quiet, a habit from his years in special forces. The guards' heavy boots echoed through the crystal halls. Other Novaterans stopped to stare at him as they passed. Humans were rare here. The throne room was huge. Crystal columns reached up into darkness, and the walls showed moving images of great battles. King Du-Jin sat on a throne made of what looked like solid light. Han Solo bowed deeply, remembering his briefing about Novateran customs. "So," the king said, "you are the human warrior I requested." His voice was deep and carried across the room easily. "Your record is impressive. 20 successful missions in the Outer Rim, 3 major victories against the Spider Pirates, and you once fought off 6 Martian assassins alone." Han Solo stayed quiet. On Earth, people bragged about such things. Here, he knew, actions meant more than words. "But now," Du-Jin continued, "I have a different mission for you, one that may be your hardest yet." He pressed a button on his throne. A door opened, and Princess Jia-Yun walked in. Han Solo's first thought was that she looked nothing like other Novaterans. She was smaller, with lighter silver skin. She moved gracefully, but without the fierce pride of her people. Her eyes were kind and curious. "This is my daughter," Du-Jin said. "Your job is to make her strong." Jia-Yun looked at Han Solo with interest. She had never seen a human up close before. "Welcome to Novatera," she said softly. "I hope we can learn from each other." Han Solo noticed how some of the guards smirked at her gentle voice. He had read about Novateran culture. They valued physical strength above all else. But in his years of fighting, he had learned that strength came in many forms. "Princess," he said, bowing again, "I would be honored to train you." "You will have 6 months," King Du-Jin announced. "In that time, you must prepare her for the trials of leadership. If she fails..." He left the threat unspoken. After they left the throne room, Jia-Yun led Han Solo to the training hall. "I should warn you," she said, stopping by a rack of weapons. "I'm not very good at fighting. I can barely lift these training swords." Han Solo picked up one of the swords. It was incredibly heavy, made for Novateran strength. He set it down and smiled. "Then we won't start with swords." "What do you mean?" "Fighting isn't just about being strong," Han Solo explained. "It's about using what you have. Your mind, your speed, your opponent's strength against them." He moved into a basic fighting stance. "On Earth, we learned this thousands of years ago. The smallest person can defeat the strongest giant, if they know how." Jia-Yun's eyes lit up with hope. For the first time, someone wasn't telling her to be stronger. Instead, they were offering to help her find her own way to fight. "When do we start?" she asked. Han Solo looked out the window at the 3 moons. "We just did, Princess. Lesson 1. True strength begins in the mind." He saw doubt and fear in her eyes, but also determination. Maybe, he thought, this mission wouldn't be so impossible after all. Dawn came early on Novatera. The first of the 3 moons was still visible when Han Solo and Princess Jia-Yun began their training in the palace gardens. The morning air was cool, and crystal flowers sparkled around them. "First," Han Solo said, "we must understand what strength means." He picked up a crystal flower and held it carefully. "See how delicate this is? But it survives the harshest storms. That's because it bends instead of fighting against the wind." Jia-Yun watched as he demonstrated, moving his body smoothly like water. "On Earth," he continued, "we learned long ago that the greatest warriors don't need to be the biggest or strongest. They need to be smart, quick, and balanced." For 3 hours, Han Solo taught Jia-Yun basic stances and movements. Other Novaterans passed by, some laughing at what they saw. To them, it looked like dancing, not fighting. But Jia didn't care anymore. For the first time, her body didn't feel raw or weak. "You're a natural at this," Han Sol said, watching her copy his movements perfectly. "Your size and grace are advantages here, not weaknesses." As days passed, Jia grew stronger in new ways. She learned to use her opponent's strength against them. Han Sol taught her Earth's martial arts, skills developed by humans who had to fight bigger, stronger enemies. She practiced redirecting force, finding weak points, and moving quickly. One morning, during their training, General Ta Wan came to watch. He was one of the king's most powerful warriors, known for his strength and traditional views. "What kind of training is this?" he asked with a sneer. "It looks like dancing." Han Sol turned to face him calmly. "Would you like a demonstration, General?" Tai Wan laughed, his silver skin gleaming in the sunlight. "You want to fight me, human? I could break you with one hand." "Not me," Han Sol said. "Her." He gestured to Jia. The princess felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. She had been training hard for weeks now. She knew things that no other Nova-Terran warrior had ever learned. Taiwan stepped into the training circle, still laughing. "Very well. Let's see what these human tricks can do." The general moved first, throwing a powerful punch that would have knocked down a normal Nova-Terran. But Jia wasn't there anymore. She moved like water, just as Han Sol had taught her. The general's strength worked against him as she redirected his force, sending him stumbling forward. Before he could recover, Jia struck 3 precise points on his arm. The general's eyes widened as his arm went numb. He tried to grab her with his other hand, but she was already moving. She used his own momentum to throw him, a technique that didn't require great strength, only perfect balance and timing. General Ta Wan landed hard on his back. The garden went silent. No one had ever seen anything like this before. Jia helped the general up, showing respect as Han Sol had taught her. "Thank you for helping me demonstrate, General," she said politely. Taiwan pulled his arm away roughly. His face was dark with anger and shame. "This is not the Nova-Terran way," he growled. "Your father will hear about this." He stormed off, his heavy footsteps crushing crystal flowers. Han Sol put his hand on Jia shoulder. "You did well, Princess. Very well. But the general is angry," Jia said quietly. "He'll make trouble for us." "Let him," Han Sol replied. "You just proved something important. There are many kinds of strength, and you're finding yours." As they returned to their training, neither of them noticed General Taiwan watching from a palace window. His eyes filled with hatred. The old warrior touched his numb arm and made a silent promise. This new way of fighting, this human influence, would not be allowed to continue. He would make sure of that. King Dujin stood in his private chamber, looking at the message crystal in his hand. It glowed with an urgent red light. The reports from his spies were troubling. 3 noble families had held secret meetings. They were questioning his decision to let a human train his daughter. In the training hall below, Princess Jia practiced with Han Sol. 2 weeks had passed since her victory over General Tawan. Now she moved with new confidence. Her silver skin shone with sweat as she performed the complex movements Han Sol had taught her. "Your balance is perfect," Han Sol said, watching her complete a difficult sequence. "Now let's try something harder." He picked up 2 training sticks, lightweight ones that Jia could handle easily. On Earth, some warriors use 2 weapons at once. It requires great focus, but it suits your style. Jia took the sticks, feeling their weight. She had learned that lighter weapons could be just as effective as heavy ones if used properly. Han Sol showed her how to move them in circles, creating a defensive wall around herself. "The key is to keep moving," he explained. "Never let your opponent know where you'll strike from. Use your speed and—" A loud alarm suddenly filled the palace. Red lights flashed in the crystal walls. Jia had never heard this alarm before, but she knew what it meant. Someone had breached the palace's security. Han Sol moved quickly to the door, checking the corridor. "Stay close to me, princess," he said. His voice was calm but serious. "Something's wrong." They heard running footsteps. 4 palace guards appeared, their silver armor gleaming. "Princess, you must come with us," one said. "The king's orders. There are intruders in the palace." Han Sol stepped forward, studying the guards carefully. Jia Yun noticed his tension. Then she saw it too. These guards moved differently than usual. Their steps were too heavy, their movements too stiff. "Princess," Han Sol said quietly, "remember what I taught you about watching an opponent's feet." Jia Yun nodded slightly. Real Novaturan guards were trained to move silently. These men's footsteps echoed too loudly. They were imposters. The false guards realized they had been discovered. They pulled out weapons, illegal plasma guns that could kill even a Novaturan. "Don't move," their leader ordered. "We won't hurt you if you come quietly." Han Sol moved first, faster than anyone expected. He knocked the nearest gun aside and struck its owner in the throat. Jia Yun didn't hesitate. She used her training sticks just as she had practiced, striking the second attacker's pressure points. The fight was quick and violent. Jia Yun moved like flowing water between the attackers. She wasn't stronger than them, but she didn't need to be. Every strike hit a weak point that Han Sol had taught her. One by one, the false guards fell. When it was over, Han Sol quickly tied up the unconscious attackers. "You did well," he said to Jia Yun. "Very well. But we need to find your father. These men didn't act alone." Jia Yun nodded, still holding her training sticks. She wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in her life, she felt truly strong. Not in the traditional Novaturan way, but in her own way. They hurried through the palace corridors, hearing more fighting in the distance. Jia Yun thought about how much she had changed. 2 months ago, she could barely lift a sword. Now she had defeated 4 armed attackers. But more importantly, she understood that true strength came in many forms. As they ran toward the throne room, Jia Yun made a silent promise. She would prove to everyone that being different didn't mean being weak, and she would protect her people, not just with strength, but with wisdom and skill. The throne room doors were sealed when Jia Yun and Han Sol arrived. 2 real palace guards lay unconscious nearby. Han Sol checked them quickly. "They're alive," he said, just stunned. Jia Yun touched the crystal door. It felt wrong. Usually, the crystal sang softly under her fingers, but now it was silent. "Someone has disabled the security system," she said. Only a high-ranking official could do that. Inside the throne room, they heard voices arguing. One was her father's. The other belonged to General Tawan. Jia Yun pressed her ear to the door, using the listening techniques Han Sol had taught her. "The old ways must be preserved," Tawan was saying. "Your daughter and her human teacher are destroying our traditions. The noble families agree with me. By attacking your own king." Du Jin's voice was angry. "This is treason, Tawan." Han Sol examined the door's control panel. "Princess," he whispered, "can you override the lock?" Jia Yun nodded. While other young Novaterans had practiced fighting, she had studied the palace's systems. Her fingers moved quickly over the control panel. Numbers and patterns that would confuse most warriors made perfect sense to her. The door clicked softly. Han Sol gave her an approving nod. Together, they slipped inside the throne room. The scene before them was tense. King Du Jin stood by his throne, facing General Tawan and 6 armed warriors. The general held a small silver device in his hand. "That's a neural disruptor," Jia Yun whispered to Han Sol. "It can paralyze everyone in this room." Tawan was still speaking. "The noble families have lost faith in you, Du Jin. They see how weak our kingdom has become. Letting humans teach our warriors, accepting their soft ways. This ends today." Jia Yun looked around the room. The crystal columns would provide good cover. The high ceiling had hanging lights that could be useful. Her mind worked quickly, seeing possibilities that most warriors would miss. "Hansol," she whispered, "I have a plan. But you must trust me." Her teacher looked at her and smiled. "I always do, princess." Jayun moved first. She threw one of her training sticks at the neural disruptor in Tadawan's hand. At the same moment, Hansol rolled forward, drawing the attention of the armed warriors. The general turned, surprised by the attack. His finger pressed the disruptor's button, but Jayun was ready. She had already jumped, grabbing one of the hanging lights. The neural wave passed harmlessly beneath her. The other warriors fell, stunned by their own weapon. Only Ta-One remained standing, protected by a personal shield. He drew his sword, its crystal blade humming with energy. "Foolish girl," he growled. "You think your human tricks can match real Novaturan strength." Jayun landed softly, just as she had practiced hundreds of times. "No, General," she said calmly. "I think they can defeat it." She moved like flowing water, avoiding his powerful strikes. The general was strong, but his movements were predictable. Jayun could read his attacks before they came, just as Hansol had taught her. King Du-jin watched in amazement as his daughter fought. She didn't try to match Ta-One's strength. Instead, she used his power against him, letting his heavy swings throw him off balance. The fight ended suddenly. Jayun slipped past the general's guard and struck 3 precise points on his chest. Ta-One's eyes widened as his body went rigid. The mighty warrior fell, unable to move. "How?" he gasped. "How did you defeat me?" Jayun picked up her training stick. "Because you never learned, General. True strength isn't about power alone. It's about wisdom, skill, and knowing when to bend like a crystal flower in the wind." The news of General Ta-One's defeat spread quickly through the Crystal Palace. King Du-jin called an emergency meeting of the noble families in the Great Hall. The 3 moons of Novatera cast their light through the high windows as the noble leaders gathered. Jayun stood beside her father's throne, wearing traditional royal robes. But now she wore them differently. Her back was straight, and her eyes were calm and confident. Hansol stood nearby, watching with pride as his student prepared to address the nobles. "My people," Jayun began, her voice clear and strong. "Today we discovered a plot against the throne." General Ta-One believed that change meant weakness. He thought that learning from others would make us less than we are. The noble leaders muttered among themselves. Many had supported Ta-One's ideas. They believed that the old ways were the only ways. "But look at what the old ways brought us today," Jayun continued. "Betrayal, violence against our own people. Is this the strength we want to preserve?" She walked down the steps, moving with the grace that Hansol had taught her. "I was born different from most Novaterans. I couldn't lift the heavy swords or fight in the traditional way. Many of you saw this as weakness." King Du-jin watched his daughter with new understanding in his eyes. The nobles fell silent, listening. "But my father made a wise choice," Jayun said. "Instead of forcing me to follow the old path, he found a new one. He brought Hansol to teach me Earth's fighting arts. And today, those new skills helped save our kingdom." She gestured to Hansol, who stepped forward. "Look at him," she said. "Humans are smaller than us. They're not as naturally strong. But they learned to be mighty in different ways. They developed skills and knowledge that even our greatest warriors never imagined." One of the oldest noble leaders stood up. "But our traditions," he started to say. "Our traditions are important." Jayun interrupted gently. "They made us strong. But true strength means growing, learning, and becoming better. It means being wise enough to know when to change." She raised her hand, and the palace systems responded. A hologram appeared, showing her fight with Ta-One. The nobles watched in amazement as the small princess defeated the powerful general using skill instead of strength. "This is what I propose," Jayun said. "A new academy where our warriors will learn both the old ways and the new. where we will combine Novateran's strength with Earth's wisdom. Together, we can become stronger than ever before. The noble leaders looked at each other. Then, one by one, they stood. The oldest among them spoke first. "The princess is right," he said. "Today she showed us that there are many kinds of strength. I support her proposal." Others began to stand and agree. King Dujin rose from his throne, his face proud. "Then it is decided," he announced. "Princess Jiayun will lead this new academy. She will teach our people that true strength comes in many forms." Han Sol watched as the nobles bowed to Jiayun. The princess he had met months ago, unsure and afraid, was gone. In her place stood a true leader, one who understood that change could make them stronger. As the meeting ended, Jiayun turned to Han Sol. "Thank you," she said softly. "You taught me more than just fighting. You taught me to believe in myself." Han Sol bowed slightly. "No, princess. You always had this strength. I just helped you find it." 1 month after General Ta Wan's defeat, Princess Jiayun's new academy opened its doors. The building was made of crystal and steel, combining Novateran tradition with modern design. Students of all ages and abilities came to learn, drawn by stories of the princess, who had found a new kind of strength. Jiayun stood in the main training hall, watching as Han Sol taught a group of young Novaterans. Some were naturally strong, like most of their people. Others were smaller or weaker, like she had been. But all of them learned together, helping each other grow stronger in different ways. "Remember," Han Sol was saying, "strength comes in many forms. Some of you will excel at traditional combat. Others will find different paths. All of these paths have value." King Dujin entered the hall quietly, watching the training with interest. The past month had brought many changes to Novatera. The old general's supporters had been removed from power. New leaders, chosen for their wisdom as well as their strength, had taken their places. "Daughter," Dujin called. "There is news you should hear." Jiayun walked to her father, moving with the quiet grace that had become natural to her. "What is it, father?" "Our scouts report movement at the borders," Dujin said. "The Empire of Krylos has noticed our recent troubles. They think we are weak and divided. Their warships approach." In the past, such news would have filled Jiayun with fear. Now she felt calm. "How long do we have?" 3 days at most. Their fleet is large. They expect us to surrender without a fight." Jiayun smiled slightly. "Then they don't know how much we have changed." She turned to the training hall and raised her voice. "Students, gather around. Your first real test has come." The young warriors formed a circle around her. Han Sol joined them, standing beside his star pupil as she addressed her people. "The Krylos Empire thinks we are weak because we have changed our ways," Jiayun said. "They expect to find us divided and unable to defend ourselves. We will show them how wrong they are." She walked to the weapon wall and picked up both a traditional Novateran sword and a pair of light fighting sticks. "We are no longer bound by one way of fighting. We are no longer limited by old ideas of strength. Each of you has learned to fight in your own way, using your own gifts." The students stood straighter, pride showing in their silver faces. They had learned that being different didn't mean being weak. "Han Sol," Jiayun called, "will you help us prepare?" Her teacher stepped forward. "The Krylos Empire expects to face traditional Novateran warriors. They won't be ready for what you've become. Each of you has learned things their soldiers have never seen. Together, you are stronger than any pure fighting force." Over the next 3 days, the academy became a center of preparation. Students trained in both Novateran and Earth fighting styles. The naturally strong learned to move with grace. The smaller ones practiced using their opponent's strength against them. All of them worked together, sharing their knowledge. King Dujin watched it all with growing pride. His daughter had not only found her own strength, she had helped her people find new strength too. As the Krylos warships approached, he knew that Novatera was ready. "They think we are weak because we have changed," Jiayun said, standing with her father as they watched the training. But change has made us stronger than ever before. The 3 moons of Novaterra shone brightly as the Krylos warships entered the planet's atmosphere. Their massive black ships blocked out the starlight, casting shadows over the crystal city. Inside the palace, Princess Jia stood with her father and Hansol, watching the enemy approach. "Their commander demands our surrender," King Du-jin said, reading the message on a crystal screen. "They say they will spare our people if we give up without fighting." Jia touched the fighting sticks at her belt. "They expect us to be weak," she said. "Let them come." The Krylos ships landed outside the city walls. Their soldiers marched out in perfect lines, wearing heavy black armor. Their commander, tall and cruel-looking, stepped forward. "People of Novaterra," his voice boomed through speakers, "we have heard of your recent troubles. Your warriors have become soft, learning weak human ways. Surrender now and serve the Krylos Empire." Jia walked to the city wall. The morning sun made her silver skin shine. "I am Princess Jia of Novaterra," she called out. "We reject your offer, but we will give you one chance to leave in peace." The Krylos soldiers laughed. Their commander raised his weapon. "Then you have chosen destruction." The attack began. Krylos warriors charged forward, expecting to face traditional Novaterran defense. Instead, they met something entirely new. Young warriors trained by Jia and Hansol moved like water between the enemy lines. The naturally strong Novaterrans used their power in new ways, combining Earth's techniques with their natural abilities. The smaller fighters slipped past heavy attacks, striking pressure points that Hansol had taught them. Jia led from the front, moving with grace and skill. When a group of Krylos soldiers surrounded her, they found themselves fighting air. She flowed around their attacks, using their own strength against them. One by one, they fell. The Krylos commander watched in shock as his soldiers were defeated by fighting styles they had never seen before. He charged at Jia himself, swinging a massive energy sword. "Your human tricks won't save you from real strength," he roared. Jia stood her ground. The commander's attack was powerful but predictable. She moved exactly as Hansol had taught her, redirecting the commander's force. The massive alien warrior found himself thrown by his own momentum, his energy sword clattering away. "You are wrong," Jia said, standing over him. "True strength isn't about size or power. It's about wisdom, skill, and learning from others." The battle ended quickly after that. The remaining Krylos soldiers surrendered, unable to fight against the new fighting style that combined the best of 2 worlds. King Du-jin stepped forward to address the defeated commander. "Return to your empire," he said. "Tell them what you saw here. Tell them that Novaterra is stronger than ever before." Later that evening, Jia stood in the academy's training hall with Hansol. The victory celebration could be heard from the city below. "You have completed your training," Hansol said quietly, "and surpassed everything I could teach you." Jia smiled. "No, my friend, we have only begun. There is always more to learn, more ways to grow stronger." She looked out at the 3 moons of Novaterra. Her world had changed, and she had changed with it. The weak princess was gone. In her place stood a leader who had learned that true strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest power lies in being wise enough to learn from others. "Stay," she said to Hansol. "Help me teach the next generation. Show them that strength isn't about being the biggest or the most powerful. It's about finding your own path and having the courage to follow it." Hansol bowed slightly. "It would be my honor, Princess." Together, they watched the moons rise over their changed world, knowing that this was not an ending, but a new beginning.